doesn't happen on board fishing vessels is maybe a good way to start. They're so diverse in the way they operate, but really any vessel is, a floating factory, which the end game is to catch fish. And there are so many different ways you can do it, and they can range from one person on an unpowered vessel just going out right off their, docks to collect traps or nets, all the way to massive, over 100-meter vessels going across the oceans with multiple crews on board, doing various responsibilities, managing a massive vessel with, complicated electronics and equipment and dangerous equipment and all of that. So, and they're responsible at sea for making sure all of those parts remain operational and, to catch fish as well. So, they cover every job on board you'd think you'd need when you're at sea for either 6 hours or 6 months. People play kind of every role on board a fishing vessel depending on the scope of the vessel again. So obviously the main role is to catch fish. That's the end game of it. But depending on the scale of the vessel, you require a lot of additional support services. So a larger vessel, obviously there's a captain on any crewed vessel who's responsible for overall management of the crew and the operation and the safety. But there's also crew on board who are dedicated as purely fishers. There are engineers on larger vessels. Sometimes there are cooks on board. So the role of a person on board a vessel can sometimes be very specific. It is often kind of an everyman or an everywoman to, make sure that every part of the operation is still running. And, sometimes you get woken up at night to go repair gear or deal with engine issues. And it can be a demanding job with very strange hours at times. When GSA sort of made the transition to GSA and decided to start developing assurances in the wild-caught sector, the goal was obviously to not duplicate what we felt were existing assurances or, what had been explored already. And a lot of the work under the water in terms of evaluating the health of the fishery and the fishing activity have been explored heavily. And what we found was there was a massive gap in what was happening above the water and the assurances of not just the product, but of the people involved in the process, the safety of the operation, that whole, the human element of the fishing. So we noticed that at the time, there was really no one addressing that level and providing an assurance to consumers that the product was procured in a way that was not just ethical for the oceans, but also ethical for the people involved, for the labor and the supply chains taking place. So that was the main reason that we saw the RFES as a good tool to develop to start, rolling out that assurance to the marketplace. And I personally think this is the most important part of the evaluation process, and this is the crew interviews. So it's when the auditor who's specifically trained in these social techniques is able to sit down with crew members and the captain separately to ask them about their contracts, about their working conditions, and really get their individual perspective on how the vessel operates and making sure that what they tell us matches what the management is doing, what the expectations from our end are as well, and get that unbiased personal answer that you can only really get through a conversation. What the RFES tries to do is really tackle some of the major issues that we've seen today, which is not just crew rights and safety, but it's also related issues that we've seen time and time again pop up, such as slavery at sea and debt bondage, and workers from potentially countries with lower socioeconomic statuses being taken advantage of in the supply chain, and having their labor sort of used against them and not really being able to leave a boat. So those are really the issues that consumers are probably most aware of and that we're trying to tackle here. But I think what we're really trying to do with the RFES is take an industry that has been allowed to function on its own in many ways in terms of a social labor perspective and bring it up to the expectations that we have on land and make sure that these floating factories operate like a factory and have all the same protocols in place and strict level of rigor around what the expectations are from management and how you treat employees. And so I think not just at GSA, but around the world now, where there's definitely a light being shined on this part of the seafood supply chain and how to make sure that workers get the same rights at sea that they do on land. Just because you're 1,000 miles at sea doesn't mean that we can't know how your work operates or how you're treated. And that's hopefully what RFES will do.